Shabbat Shalom, and we will begin with our Torah blessing. And here it is. And everybody, if you could mute, that would be great. Yes, please. And you can join me in a muted blessing. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. So let me ask you, let's do a little recap of what we read last time, because it was a few weeks ago. Anybody remember? Jane, go ahead, just unmute and yeah.
Weren't we doing Goliath, David and Goliath?
We definitely did David and Goliath, absolutely. And we had some theories about whether or not it was really a little slingshot with a stone, or whether it was something more of a, powerful weapon that could slay man.
And David was introduced to Saul, and we have two different stories about that.
Right. So
am I right about that?
Absolutely.
That we did that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's what I remember.
Absolutely. So one story is that David was a liar, L-Y-R-E player. And so when Saul's moods would be, black, he would come and play the liar for him to calm him down. And then we have another completely different story. And by the way, for those of you who are taking Aaron Weisben's class on the Torah, on the, big events in the Bible, we know that these stories have been knitted together from different sources, and that, there's a very elaborate story about Saul and David and Solomon, whereas the rest of the kings get very short shrift. So, a lot of it is probably, fictionalized. Nobody was there to witness it, apparently. So anyway, the other story is that there's this big, giant who is threatening the Israelites. And this giant is Goliath, who is a Philistine. And David is able to slay him with this slingshot. Now, then, of course, Saul says, who is this man? And by the way, right before David does this, what does he find out? Why is he so eager to do this?
Oh, he's gonna get the eldest daughter.
Correct.
Right?
So
Merab.
He overhears these people saying, yes, whoever slays this giant will end up marrying Merab, who is the oldest daughter of the king. Clearly, we find out that we have an ambitious man in David, right? He's not just doing it because he wants to help the people, by getting rid of this big threat. He is very eager to marry the king's daughter. But of course, then what happens is he doesn't get the daughter, right? Saul keeps using his daughters as entrapments. Now the next daughter is Michal. And what do we cover the part where David is supposed to, David is supposed to do something in order to get Michal.
He needs to get 100 foreskins of the Philistines, who are, of course, going to give that up really willingly. Yeah. Because who wants a foreskin?
Right. Well, and he gets 200, right?
And he comes, David, I find always overdoes it. If I have to slay this group, why don't I just go ahead and slay another group while I'm in the neighborhood?
While I'm there. And then remember that what people are starting to sing is women start to sing, because apparently David is very good looking and sexy. And he's, a warrior, which I guess is appealing to some people. And so they sing, Saul has struck down his thousands and David his tens of thousands. So of course this makes Saul very, very annoyed and very concerned, because he knows he's not going to be his dynasty is not going to continue past him. And so here's this little pipsqueak who's, really annoying him because everybody loves him. And apparently now this is something Aaron suggested. I guess maybe there are different sources about Saul, but sometimes, or at least in the beginning, Saul seems like a pretty okay person, right? He's he's tall, he stands out from the crowd, he's humble, and he becomes the king through lottery, even though he's already been selected by God. And, he has moods, brings in this nice young man to play some music for him, and everything's cool. Now he's turning into kind of a bit of a psycho. And so we think maybe that's a different source of people who wanted to make him look bad. Just the way in Torah, there are stories that make Moses look good and stories that make Moses look bad. Same thing with Aaron. So possibly the priests who were followers of Aaron were in competition with the priests who were followers of Moses, and they had competing narratives about the other. So we've got kind of, the Bible was not written by one person. It was written by a lot of people, and there's a lot of traditions that were knitted together. So we get a lot of kind of conflicting stories, but at the same time, it's realistic, right? I mean, there's nobody who's perfect out there, and there's nobody, I don't think, who's all bad. So we find out the complexity of human beings this way. So are there any comments or questions before we proceed with chapter 19, Jane?
As far as the different portraits of Saul, and I'm not quite sure of this, does this have anything to do with the geographical locations of where their tribe was? I know that the final redaction of the Torah and Tanakh was written in Judea, or from people that were from Judea. Was Saul from the north?
Saul was a Benjaminite, so he's
so he's really from the south also.
Yeah.
So it's not a north-south thing.
Well, yes, there is a north-south thing in the Torah, definitely. Okay, because one of the strains is from the north. The E source is from the north.
Right.
But probably there were stories, that were carried down from many, hundreds of years. We don't even know if there was a King Saul, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there might have been some stories about the first king of Israel was this guy, who knows what his name was, and he was wonderful. And then other people say, no, he was awful. We don't really know. There's a little bit of evidence that there was a King David.
Mm-hmm.
There's really, I don't think, any evidence that there was a Saul. And we don't even know if David was more than just a chieftain of some sort. We don't know that he was a king of a big country. So that's all.
The archaeology says that it was a very small area.
But even like they found this thing mentioning David a number of years ago, but before that they didn't have that much. So before that they said, well, there's no evidence it was David, but then they find evidence that there was.
Mm-hmm.
So the more archaeology is done, the more we find out, hopefully what really did exist, or we may not know exactly in what form. Okay, so we're going to pick up here, and I'm going to share my screen. Here we are with, so now David is in Saul's household, and we get these series of attempts to kill David, which I actually in some ways find amusing because he keeps doing it over and over and over again. And he misses every time. It's sort of amusing in a way. So would somebody like to read?
Sure.
Oh, Jenny, go ahead.
Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." Jonathan,
let me stop you just for one moment. Sorry. So notice, remember, it said that Michal was in love with David. Remember that? And Jonathan is in love with David as well. So they both love him. And right now you have Jonathan, who's the son of Saul, right? That's emphasized here at the very beginning, is now willing to basically betray his father in order to save David. Now keep that in mind, because he's not the only one who's doing that, right? You'll find out that Michal will do the same thing. So that's the first thing that's really, kind of important to pay attention to. Okay, keep going, sorry.
No. Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul, his father, and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you, and what he has done has benefited you greatly. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" Just thought it was interesting that on 4, it was reinforced Saul, his father. Like,
Yes.
we know that that's his father, but
Exactly.
it's reinforced.
Good.
Yeah.
Good, absolutely. It's underlined a couple of times that he's the son of Saul. And you would think Saul not only is his father, he's also the king, that his allegiance should be to him rather than to David. But David has some, magnetic pull on people. Good, thank you.
Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath: "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death."
Okay, keep that in mind because he's a liar, L-I-A-R, not L-Y-R-E. Go ahead.
So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Once more war broke out, and David went out and fought the Philistines. He struck them with such force that they fled before him. But such an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape.
Okay, thank you. So now you can't see this in the English, but according to Robert Alter, the same verb is used in verse 8 for David defeating the Philistines and for Saul striking David in verse 10. So what's important about that is there's this contrast between David, who's able to fight the Philistines and be successful, right? Thousands of Philistines killed in his path, whereas Saul tries to kill one person and he can't even do it. Same verb. So it's a way of comparing the two. And, there's a constant comparison between, these two guys. Oh, does the liar pun work in Hebrew? No, but too bad, right? But yeah, it was sort of my pun. But no, it's not the same in Hebrew. But thanks for the question. That's a good question.
So, Rabbi, can I
Yes,
ask?
Of course you can.
So, when they talk about an evil spirit from the Lord, did you explain that last time that kind of refers to like mental illness or something? Is that their way of describing what that is? Or
Well, that's an excellent question. So, mental illness, they didn't know from mental illness, of course, in those days. So the assumption would be that it would be an evil spirit of some kind that, God was responsible for, or maybe not responsible for. In this case, they certainly are attributing it to God, that, he's lost favor with God, and it's not clear how that's manifesting itself, but clearly, I think you would probably diagnose him today as bipolar, because he seems to sometimes be in a really great mood and sometimes be totally depressed. But, here, the way they explain it is, they don't understand mental illness at this point in history. So it's God doing this somehow, it's sort of stacking the deck against him, right? Because if he's depressed and trying to kill David, that's not going to really, help his cause. But good question. All right, so let's go back to this. Okay, Jenny, if you wouldn't mind continuing.
Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, "If you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed." So Michal let David down through a window, and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head.
Okay, thank you. Let's just stop there for a minute. Now, this is really important. First of all, you have the second child of Saul basically betraying her own father to save David, just like Jonathan did. So that's one really important thing to notice. Second of all, how about letting him out through the window? Tell me how easy that is for a woman, unless she's some really super woman. Assuming David is some, hulky guy who's able to be a great warrior. She lets him out the window.
But it doesn't say that he was unconscious or anything. It just, maybe she just opened the window.
She let him down, which means that he had to, how do you let someone down? You don't just drop him out the window, right? There was probably a sheet or something he used to go down. So this takes a lot of strength, right? It takes a lot of strength to let a guy down from the window. It's sort of like, the sort of apocryphal story about, if a woman or a mother sees her child about to be run over by a car, she's able to, stop the car or lift the car or whatever. So she's all of a sudden having this incredibly superhuman strength to let him out the window. Yes, Sherry.
But couldn't you quibble with the verb let? I mean, the way it's written, you don't know whether let down really means let down.
Yeah, I think, from the way that I studied it, actually with Dr. Eskenazi, who's doing next week's Torah study, it's more like, here we are up above and, using a sheet or something to help him down. And that's going to require a lot of strength. So that's how I learned it. Yeah, Jason.
So we know for sure it's on a higher floor.
Let me look at the Hebrew. The reason I'm not using
maybe they're one of those sub-basement apartments you had to climb up through the window.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the case. Let's see. This is
Rabbi. You mentioned that this was written by different people, so everyone can put in what they want to put in.
Right.
When one says one thing and someone else says something else, obviously it wasn't written down until individuals did it.
Let me just look for 1 second. So it's verse 12. Let's see. It says Tored, which, that means to go down. So and Tored is in the, she is doing it to him, letting him down. That's what it means. So I don't think if they're at a regular, floor, she's not going to have to let him down. He can just climb out the window, right? To let him down means he's dangling. Let me see if they have a note here. Okay, this is what one of the traditional commentators, Kli Yakar, says. So Michal lowered. She did it herself without help from the servants so that no one would know if David's escaped. So, if she was just letting him out the window, she could open the window, he could just go out, but she lowered him. It's the verb to lower. So clearly they're at a higher level, otherwise he could just climb out or jump out. She wouldn't have to really do anything. She could just have opened the window, but she lowered him. So I think that suggests something more. Jane, go ahead.
It seems to me that they would be on a higher level just for safety's sake.
Probably.
Because if the palace were invaded, it would be really stupid to be on the first floor.
Good point. But again, the verb to lower, you don't lower somebody from a, basement or first floor house or apartment.
Walter says that the rope was improvised. She's improvising. That's another thing about Michal. She can improvise on the spur of the moment. Boom. Right. Which she does.
Whether they had a rope available or whether she took a sheet, we don't know.
Yeah.
But she certainly did something to get him out there. All right. Now, the other thing that's really important to take a look at is she puts the idol in the bed with goat's hair. Does that remind you of any other story?
Yeah, Leah.
Rachel.
Rachel. Oh, Rachel, sorry, Rachel. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now remember that in the story of Jacob, right? He's leaving Laban's home with his various wives, Rachel being his favorite one. Mm-hmm. And the father Laban comes running after them saying, where are my, household idols? And she's got them, under her seat, right? And she claims that she can't, get down because she has her period or something like that. But in any event, so that's one thing. Another father betrayed by a daughter. But what about the goat's hair? Does that remind you of anything?
That's Esau.
Exactly. Remember that a father again is tricked
Oh, yeah.
by feeling the goat's hair and thinking that Jacob is Esau, right? Because the mother gives him the goat's skin to put on his arm because Esau was hairy. So there are these, echoes of other stories. And there's a lot of intra-biblical references like this.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think
that's a lot like the fathers are supposed to worry about their kids in this as a tell, watch out for your children. They're gonna cause you problems later on.
yeah, well, they do, right? What's really interesting, like last week's Torah portion was Vayeshev, which means, and he, settled down, which is Jacob supposedly settling down. And the whole Torah portion is about how he is totally unsettled, right? Because he favors Joseph, and that causes Joseph to be, envied by the brothers and to finally be sold into slavery. So there's that irony there. But yeah, children cause their parents distress and vice versa. But Jenny.
I was also wondering about the household idol, and that's just put in there very casually, no big deal here. The household had an idol. So I'm assuming that's also a reflection that polytheism is still being practiced. And at this point, that's not in itself particularly noteworthy.
No, I'm glad you pointed that out, because absolutely. The fact that there is an idol, what does that mean? That, David is tolerating an idol in the house? Isn't he supposed to be, very loyal to God? I mean, God's certainly loyal to him. And here he is with an idol in the household, just the way Laban had an idol. So yes, there's, if you look at the 10 Commandments, for example, where it says you shall have no other gods before me, or if you look at the Michamocha ba'elim Adonai, okay, what that means literally is who is like you among the gods. Now, a lot of times it gets translated as who is like you among the divine or the celestial beings, because whoever's translating wants to kind of pave over this problem. But clearly, there still was worship of other gods for a long time, okay? And obviously, the history beyond Solomon is all about that, the Israelites went after other gods, they get punished, then they do better for a while, then they go after other gods again. I mean, you don't just go from polytheism to monotheism in one fell swoop. So, and idols are easier to relate to because, here's my idol, I can see it, here it is. Whereas God is invisible. So yes, absolutely. That, the idol is definitely a little tell there that we are not in monotheism at this point. In fact, even the idea that there is only one God is not till Isaiah, which is much later. Yeah, I'm sorry, who's?
Oh, I would say that's just what stood out to me is there's actually no comment about that. Like it didn't merit a comment.
Yeah, well, Robert Alter comments on it. But let me just see if because I've got this more traditional commentary, and I don't think they say anything either about it. Let me just see if I don't think they mention it either. I think they want to gloss.
Yeah,
Let's see. Wait. Okay, it says here, Michal took the mannequins. Well, I don't know. I don't see any mannequins in here. Yeah, they translate it as mannequins rather than as idol. That's interesting. Let me see what the word is in Hebrew. Wait a second. The Tikach Michal et ha-terafim. Terafim does not mean it does not mean mannequin. Let's see what it says. She took the mannequins. It was common for a woman to make mannequins resembling her husband to remind her of him when he was away. Now, Michal took the mannequins to make it appear that David was sick in bed.
That's a press.
It's a stretch. She didn't take the household idol and put it in the bed with the goat hair to make it look like him. She had a mannequin of him because if he was away at war, she was like,
Oh, come on.
yeah, come on, it's right.
Jewish Study Bible leaves it as idol.
I think idol is teraphim. I'm pretty sure is the same word that was used for Rachel. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that would be it. And here they're translating in English as mannequin. And then, but apparently Abarbanel, who certainly wasn't speaking English, he could read Hebrew. That's his comment, that it was a mannequin resembling her husband. So again, this is an effort to whitewash or godwash the story. Like, oh, of course they couldn't have had idols in the household of David. God forbid, you know?
Sounds like the modern sex toys.
I didn't want to say it, but yes. Just
Somebody's
in
got
case
it.
David's gone, we'll have a nice mannequin to replace him. Okay, Jenny, would you like to continue?
Sure, on that note.
On that lovely note,
Right.
so let's see, that night, yeah,
Yeah.
11.
Okay. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, warned him, if you don't run for your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be killed. So Michal let David down through a window and he fled and escaped. Then Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed, covering it with a garment and putting some goat's hair at the head.
Okay, that's what we just read, but it's good to read it again to
Oh,
just.
I'm sorry.
And no, it's my fault. But yeah, idol, that's what it is. You know, this is a Christian translation, but that is a correct translation as opposed to mannequin. Okay.
When Saul sent the men to capture David, Michal said, he is ill. Then Saul sent the men back to see David and told them, bring him up to me in his bed so that I may kill him. But when the men entered, there was the idol in the bed, and at the head was some goat's hair. Saul said to Michal, why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped? Michal told him, he said to me, let me get away. Why should I kill you?
So what is she doing here?
She's covering for David by telling a lie.
Yeah,
Her
she's
father.
lying to her father. So not only did she help him escape, she's now lying and saying that David, was going to kill her if she didn't, let him go, right?
Right.
Okay.
When David had fled and made his escape, he went to Samuel at Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. Then he and Samuel went to Naoth and stayed there. Word came to Saul, David is in Naoth at Ramah. So he sent men to capture him. But when they saw a group of prophets prophesying with Samuel standing there as their leader, the Spirit of God came on Saul's men, and they also prophesied. Saul was told about it, and he sent more men, and they prophesied too. Saul sent men a third time, and they also prophesied. Finally, he himself left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Siku, and he asked, where are Samuel and David? Over in Naoth at Ramah, they said.
Okay, let's stop just for a second. So notice that, things come in threes. This is sort of like when, what's his name? Balaam was supposed to prophesy against the Israelites. Remember, Balaam, the king, kept sending him back, go, because, the first time he doesn't do it, the second time, he keeps trying to get him to do what he has ordered him to do. So here, the men are being sent forward and they end up prophesying, which is kind of funny. And then Saul suddenly starts to prophecy, and yet he's a prophet. What
does prophesying mean?
To be a prophet and to, right? It's the verb to be a prophet, or to do what a prophet does. Does that make sense? So they're all like sort of speaking in tongues, I guess, and but Saul is now prophesying, and he still can't answer a basic question. Where are, Samuel and David, right? It's sort of a ironic thing that if he's able to prophecy, that's something he should be able to figure out. Plus, he's always, when we first met him, remember, he's always asking questions. Where's so-and-so? Where's such and such? He's a bit of a bumbling person. Okay, just wanted to point that out, and then we'll finish that chapter.
So Saul went to Naoth at Ramah, but the Spirit of God came even on him, and he walked along prophesying until he came to Naoth. I just have to add, this sounds like a Monty Python skit. I just have to add
The whole story of Saul trying to kill David is a bit like Monty Python, because he's constantly trying and he keeps failing over and over and over again.
He stripped off his garments, and he too prophesied in Samuel's presence. He lay naked all that day and all that night. This is why people say, is Saul also among the prophets?
Yeah, so he's doing some kind of performance art, you know, lying naked all day and all night, and yet he doesn't seem to be able to understand anything. Okay, we're going to go forward and get out of this ad. Okay. Now, the reason I picked this, even though it's not a Jewish translation, is because it's in good English that's easy to follow. Whereas like Sepharia, which is a wonderful resource that has the Hebrew and the English is very stilted. And so I just figure it's easier to read something that we can all relate to, as opposed to trying to plow through the thous and these and, you know, those kinds of things. All right, before we go to the next chapter, does anybody have any questions or comments? Or
Are these people on drugs? I'm serious. I mean, it's like, you know, all of a sudden the Lord came over him and said, did he eat some mushrooms on the way? And then, you know, and now he's running around naked. It's like something at a rave.
well, you know, maybe that's the way they were able to prophesy, was by doing drugs. I don't know. They probably did.
Well, there was ergot in the wheat back then, you know, so that was, you know.
I think they knew probably about, you know, plants that would make you hallucinate or whatever. So it's very possible.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
shaman did, that's for sure.
Okay, so let's go on to the next chapter. Would somebody like to read from here?
I can read a little bit. if
Thank
somebody-
you, Sandy.
Oh, if you want me to, I can read.
Oh,
So let's start with Sandy, and when her voice gives out, we can go on to Ruth.
Then David, let me put my glasses on. Again. Then David fled from Naoth to Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me?" "Never," Jonathan replied. "You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so." But David took an oath and said, "Your father knows very well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he has said to himself, "Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives and as you die, there is only one step between me and death." Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you." Okay, next person.
Okay, so you know what? Let me just stop for 1 minute, because I was just glancing over at my altar. And there's a whole thing here about his taking his clothes off, Saul taking his clothes off. So I want to read this to you. So he stripped off his clothes and lay naked. In the clash between Saul and Samuel that marked their final estrangement, Samuel had explicitly associated garment with kingship. Now the frenzy that seizes Saul drives him to strip off his garments, implicitly to divest himself of the kingship. Just as the first episode of Saul among the prophets was an investment with kingship. There was a whole scene with prophets way back. Robert Polson brilliantly links this moment with Michal's use of a garment and the contrasting narrative presentations of David and Saul. Whereas Michal covers David's bed with his clothes, Saul strips off his clothes and lies naked all day and night. A graphic picture of how the narrator hides David and bears Saul throughout the last two chapters. By the way, you notice garments do play a particularly important role in our Bible. Remember, we had the whole business of Joseph supposedly, being killed because his beautiful multicolored cloak is brought with blood on it to the father, to Jacob, and he assumes he's dead. We have Judah and Tamar, which was in last week's Torah portion also, where Tamar is supposed to marry Judah's son, but he's withholding the son from her. So she takes matters into her own hands and disguises herself as a prostitute. And in order to, he doesn't have any cash on him, so, or chickens. So he gives her his cloak and his seal and his cord and his staff. And, you know, then when he comes to pay his debt the next day and get his stuff back, there's no prostitute. And so when she's pregnant, he thinks she's committed adultery, and she presents him with these items of dress and says, the father is the man to whom these belong. And he says, you are more righteous than I. He recognizes that he's the one who impregnated her. And there's a Potiphar story too from last week, where Mrs. Potiphar wants to have some kind of sexual relationship with Joseph. Joseph says no. And she tells her husband that, you know, here's his cloak. He tried to rape me, right? So there's a lot of stuff with clothing and identity and disguise throughout. And this all has, you know, the echo of those stories. Okay, so then Ruth, you can pick it up. Verse 4. But you need to unmute.
Ruth, just hold down the
She did
space
it. She did
No,
it.
I did it. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. So David said, look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I am supposed to dine with the king, but let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because the annual sacrifice is being made there for the whole clan. If he says, very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he's determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I am guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father? Never, Jonathan said. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? David asked, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? Come, Jonathan said, let's go out into the field. So they went there together.
Okay, let me just stop for one moment, because I just want to read you something also from Alter. So Alter thinks that this idea that Jonathan says, listen, my father's not going to hide anything from me, seems like a misplaced trust. He said, if one considers Saul's previous behavior and his relationship with Jonathan, this faith in his father's openness with him seems singularly misplaced. Throughout, Jonathan remains well-meaning and naive against the wary, calculating David. So you have these, you know, Saul's two kids are pretty much what you see is what you get. David is a calculating guy, right? Oh, if I do this, I'll marry the daughter. And if I do that, I'll get this. And, you know, and somehow he's taken these two kids into his confidence, and they decided to be loyal to him and to save his life. And the kids are just doing whatever it is David would like them to do. So
don't the kids recognize that their father has a mental illness? I mean, in one of the novels I read, it had all about that. And everybody knew he was nuts.
well,
It
it doesn't say here one way or the other, right? It doesn't say, oh, they knew their father was crazy, therefore they protected David. They, you know, maybe that's what they're thinking. We don't know. You know, there's not a lot of interior monologues.
Don't you think they just cared for David? They both loved David.
I think that that's probably the main thing, is that they love David. It's not clear that they love Saul. It's not clear that Saul loved them either, that Saul did much as a father for them. But, you know, maybe there's other stuff going on. We don't know. I mean, that's why if you read a novel about this, somebody said, let's get inside their heads and figure out what they're really feeling. But we don't really know. As I said, it's very rare that you find out what someone is thinking. There are a couple of exceptions. In the case of Judah, for example, when he sees that his first two sons die after marrying Tamar, he says to himself, I am not giving my third son to her, even though he promises that he will. So we know that he's lying there. And when David, kind of says, I could be the husband of the king's daughter. So we get a few little glimpses like that, but not a lot of other interior monologue or, insights into people's thinking. So that's why, for example, the red tent I know is very, very popular when it came out, because it gave the story from Dina's perspective. Now, I don't know that I agree with the perspective that they gave of Dina, but that's beside the point. They really, Anita Diamond, the author, really, focuses on the women's experience, which you do not get in the Bible very much. Any other? Yeah, Jane.
Rabbi, Cheryl Exum has written several articles about this, and particularly with Michal as the focus. And she plays with this concept of house, because Michal, as a daughter, belongs to the house of Saul, father, but as a wife belongs to the house of David. And she's caught between the two houses, her loyalty to both, and who she's going to choose. And one of the most interesting things that she said when she was comparing Michal and David is how well David does outside the physical house. He's a leader of a Hebrew band, and he comes back and he gets the throne, and he does very, very well by that. So it's an article she wrote in a book called Fragmented Women, and it's really has so many different layers to it. You can just peel it like an onion, because she gives you so many different ideas about this relationship.
Well, it's interesting because when Michal is identified, it does say she's David's wife as opposed to Saul's.
She's either David's wife or Saul's daughter. And that's another tension that she plays with. In fact, at the beginning of the article, she has about 7 different instances where Michal is referred as one or the other. She gives it to you chapter and verse. It's a very well-written article.
Great. I'd love to see it if you have a copy.
I'll Xerox it for you and send it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I find her fascinating. She's a really interesting historian.
Yeah, I've read some of her pieces.
Yeah.
Okay, Ruth, you want to pick it up? So now we've got this whole sort of elaborate scheme to find out what Saul's intentions are towards David.
Which chapter are we on?
We're still on this chapter 20, and here we went. So they're going out in the field now, right, to see what Saul is going to do.
I will shoot 3.
Then verse 12.
12. Then Jonathan said to David, I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth.
Okay, so let me just point out here that Jonathan is saying, once you take over, please remember me and my family, right? He's not completely without some motive to take care of himself. He probably knows that David's going to be the next king and that his father will, no longer be on the throne. And he wants to make sure that David's not going to somehow take revenge on Saul's son and his family. So, he's not completely naive and without some motivation to take care of himself. Okay.
So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, May the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon feast. You will be missed because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when the troubles began and went by the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I was shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, go find the arrows. If I say to him, look, the arrows are on the side of you, bring them here, then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you are safe, there is no danger. But if I say to the boy, look, the arrows are beyond you, then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away.
Every sip of Woodford Reserve bourbon.
And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever. So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat him to eat. He sat in the customary place by the wall, opposite Jonathan, and Abner sat next to Saul. But David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day. So he thought, something must have happened to David to make him ceremonial unclean. Surely he is unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?
All right, let me just explain this business about being unclean. So they're eating a sacrificial meal, and because it's the new moon, and so they have to be in a state of ritual purity. So a seminal emission, for example, mischance is how they term it in Hebrew, would render a person impure until the evening of the day of which he cleansed himself by, going to the mikveh. So he's thinking maybe that's why he's not there. He's not ritually pure, but by the second day, obviously there's something going on.
Did you notice there's a little internal monologue for Saul? It's what he thought. We were just talking about how we don't see those much. And then they tell us what he was thinking, but what he didn't say. He could have just said that out loud. He could have just said that to the table. Why isn't David here? He must be.
Very good. Very good.
When they want to tell us what someone's thinking, they can.
They can, yeah. I mean, there's more in these stories because they're pretty elaborate stories, but some stories are just so, abrupt that you just don't get much of anything except the outward. But also the other thing is that the way he refers to David is the son of Jesse, which is supposedly dismissive as opposed to using his actual name. Okay, so let's see, something must have happened to him. Okay, so now he's,
You want to go on?
Please.
Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town of my brother, has ordered me to be there. If I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away to see my brother. That is why he has not come to the king's table. Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die.
Okay, let's take 1 second. So he says, you son of a rebellious woman. So who's that? Who's the son? Who's the rebellious woman?
Well, it was Saul's wife, wasn't it?
Exactly. It's Saul's wife. Now, why is he saying that she's a rebellious woman? So
does he have more than one wife?
Probably.
Son of a rebellious woman sounds familiar. Son of a
Right. Yes, so Alter translates this as son of a perverse, wayward woman. All English translations have treated the term as rebellion, but he's looking at it more as perverse and wayward.
I find it interesting that because he's got two kids he thinks have betrayed him, he's blaming the mother for those traits rather than looking at, like, it must not be from me. I couldn't possibly have raised two traitorous children, right? It must be their
Right.
mother.
Right. And so what is it that you say when you're upset with a kid, one of your kids?
Yeah, you say, you know, yeah, you're
You say to the wife, your kid
Your
did this,
child.
right?
Well, that's the wife's place anyway, is rearing the children while the king is
Now,
ruling.
I'm going to say something. I'm just quoting Robert Alter. Okay, this is not me talking. The shame of your mother's nakedness. This is quite violent. Nakedness refers to the sexual part. So you know how we say things like in the idiom for taboo intercourse, uncovering the nakedness of, which we saw in the story of Noah, for example, right? We've had a couple of instances in the Torah where we uncover the nakedness of somebody, which really means, you know, some kind of intercourse. And so this shame of your mother's nakedness has the virtual force of your mother's cunt, that the language is not obscene. Pretty nasty, both in terms of how he treats his own wife and how he's talking about his own son, right? But he's obviously very angry.
Do we know the name of his wife? I don't remember her ever being mentioned.
No, but there's something else. Oh, yeah. So the other thing, this is according to the more traditional commentary.
Mm-hmm.
So Radak, who's one of the traditional commentators, says that she's a rebellious woman. Now, why is he married to a rebellious woman? Because she chose Saul rather than he choosing her. Now, remember, at the end of the book of Judges, you had the tribe of Benjamin. Remember the Benjaminites? There was a whole thing going on with them, and all these men from other tribes took women from that tribe. So all the men were choosing wives, but Saul was too shy to choose a wife, so she chose him. Thus, I guess, the rebelliousness, because if she has the nerve to choose her own husband, I guess she has the nerve to not listen to him and to bring up these bratty children. Okay, that's a traditional commentary on that.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
Is there any possibility that there's a suggestion that he might be illegitimate here?
I don't know. I didn't see anything about that.
I guess when they're talking about the uncovering the wife's nakedness, I'm wondering, is he suggesting that the wife may have been unfaithful and that might not be his kid? Like could be a way of rejecting him. That would be shameful to him more than anything, though, I think.
Doesn't it say that he is his son? I mean, it's mentioned so many times, the word son.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just thinking in anger, like if he's saying that to his son, and maybe, I don't know.
I guess it's possible. I mean, obviously the aspersions are being cast on the woman, as you know, Jason pointed out. You know, all the bad traits are because you're from this woman who's rebellious. But I didn't see any suggestion about that, but I think it's certainly possible. You know, she's such a terrible woman. Yeah.
Well, both children are disobeying him or doing things that certainly he would not be very proud of.
Now, you can also assume that given the fact that God has chosen David, that these kids are choosing David also, because either they explicitly know that David is the next king, or that somehow God is using them as instruments to save David's life. You know, can't forget that God is a player in all of this. Okay, let's go on.
I lose track. Where are we?
Yeah, I've lost track too. I think it's 32.
Yeah. Why should he be put to death? What has he done? Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him and to kill him. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger on the second day of the feast. He did not eat because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning, Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David, and he had a small boy with him. And he said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, "Isn't the arrow beyond you?" Then he shouted, "Hurry, go quickly, don't stop." The boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about all this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapon to the boy and said, "Do carry them back to town." After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times, with his face to the ground. Then they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other at the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town.
Thank you. So as you might imagine, there certainly is speculation that David and Jonathan had a, homosexual relationship, which is certainly, possible. I mean, it says that David loves Jonathan. It never says that David loves any of his other wives. So it's certainly possible. And any thoughts about the David-Jonathan relationship? Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Well, I just was curious about the meaning where earlier it says that that he, what did he say about he loved he loved him as himself,
right? Yeah,
and I'm not
exactly.
sure what does that mean. I mean,
well, I think David loved himself pretty much. But yeah, no, it's interesting. And also what I was noticing about that verse where it says, "For he loved him as much as he loved himself," the "he" is not completely clear in that verse.
Mm-hmm.
And, you look at it, you go, well, is it Jonathan that loves David as much as he himself, or is it David that loves Jonathan? It's sort of like that wrestling in the middle of the night that Jacob has with the Ish, the man, where it's not clear it could keep saying he. And I think it may very well be purposeful that it's unclear. So, but we really get a sense that of all the relationships David's going to have, and it's
One
hard
with Jonathan.
I'm sorry?
The one with Jonathan is.
I think it's the most mutual one, because you haven't seen enough of his relationship with his wives yet to be able to compare it, but you will soon see. So far, you see Michal was a means to an end. He certainly, said that Michal loved him and never says that he loved her. You know that he married her because, it was a calculated move on his part to marry her, because yes, God says you're going to be the next king, but he also needs some legitimacy by being married to the current king's daughter, because that also gives you that extra layer of legitimacy. So that that's the reason he married her. We're going to see the next couple of wives, why he marries them. And then you'll see the final scene with Michal. The only place where it says that he loved someone else is Jonathan. And, now they're parting and crying. So clearly, whatever their relationship was, it was probably the most genuine of all his relationships.
And they talk about all the descendants. So it's not just their love for each other. They want it to continue. Of course, we have no control over that.
Well, they certainly wanted to make sure that the descendants would not be mistreated. And we'll see that David sticks to his word on that one. Because, Saul's going to eventually die or be defeated or something's going to happen. And, we don't want his sons to have to bear the responsibility for that and pay the price. Okay, any other comments or thoughts?
You mentioned bowing 3 times, and I've noticed there's a lot of references to things done 3 times.
Yes.
What is the symbolism there?
It's just their numbers like 3, 7, 40, that are like these really important numbers. I don't know. 7 is a, number of completion. So when you get to 8, it's got a whole other significance. Like the 8th day is when you have a Brit Milah. I was just reading something about Hanukkah where, the number 8 is supposed to be the divine, aspect of the world, coming into being. It's just one of those numbers that, 3's the charm, right?
Yeah.
They're all, it's not just in Judaism. Somehow. Yeah, it's not just in Judaism. It's, I don't know. It's one of those numbers that, what is it called? A primary number or something? Because you can't divide it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Jason?
I mean, I think you were kind of implying this, but I might want to make clear what we're talking about with David then is that possibly the marriage was just a marriage of convenience, as just something he would have done because it was necessary and it made it easy because she was so fond of him, but that he maybe honestly wasn't even interested in a wife, but Jonathan was who he wanted to be with. And that's probably implied here is that was probably his real love and that the wife was just for convenience.
Okay, definitely. Michal was convenience, period. And, there've been articles written about this or books or whatever. I haven't read them, but, if you just take it on what is presented to you here, the only genuine relationship is the one with Jonathan.
David.
Jane?
I think we're imposing our 21st century views on these people. I mean, it was only until very modern times that you married for love. The marriages were always arranged. It's a marriage of convenience. It usually united 2 families together, and there was usually property involved. Love was for the lower classes, not for people of this level,
Well, you're right about that. On the other hand, once you married somebody for convenience or whatever, eventually maybe you felt love for that person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're ever going to see any love between David and Michal.
No, you're not. And also, I don't think David really loved his other wives. I mean, he lusted after them, but
yeah, he does lust after Bathsheba.
Even Abigail, I'm not sure that.
No, I don't think he lusted after her.
Yeah,
he definitely lusted after Bathsheba.
Yeah, Well, he lusted after her. I think he did maybe fall in love with her. But, after they had Solomon, that was at the end.
Yeah.
There's no more kids coming from that union. And then the way that the children of his wives, the way he treated them, and I don't want to give away the story, this is a very disinterested father.
To say the least.
So, and I think
he's not a great father.
Starts from the wives, the relationship with the wives, and rolls over to his children.
But by the way, remember that Jacob loves Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it does say that he loves her and he wants to marry her, and he works 7 years to marry her, and then he has to work another 7 years to marry her.
Right.
So despite the fact that, a lot of this was about families getting together,
mm-hmm.
It's not like love is completely absent. And it's emphasized so much in the Jonathan story.
Mm-hmm.
That he really loves Jonathan. Again, I don't know whether it's, just plain old friendship or it's something beyond friendship. It doesn't really matter. The point is that they love each other and they watch out for each other, and it's mutual on as much of a level as it can be mutual, given the fact that David's going to be king, but it's certainly not mutual for the others,
mm-hmm.
for the women. Okay, so let's go a little further.
Sandy.
Oh, Jason, did you? Oh, Sandy.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Sorry, I didn't see.
I just wanted to comment that, I lived in Pakistan for 3 years, and all the marriages there that I knew of, except a couple, were arranged, I think that people did learn to love each other.
Good. I'm glad you said that because I was thinking about Fiddler on the Roof. Remember the song they sing after 25 years of marriage?
Right.
Oh yeah, I guess I do love you. And I didn't want to mention it because I thought, well, that's kind of, folkloric. It's not really, reflective of reality. But yeah, I do think people eventually, you do a lot of stuff, you go through a lot of experiences together. How can you not either hate or love at the end of it, right? Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to go on to the next chapter.
Could I just add something to that?
Yeah.
I read it was an article, maybe in newspaper or magazine recently, and it was about how a young couple, I'm sorry, I don't remember what country they were from, and they spoke about how they had opted, I think, to have an arranged marriage, and how successful it had been. And the couple just spoke, very lovingly that, they would endorse it. So they knew that it, wasn't for everyone in our day and age, but they were a contemporary, couple. And they just spoke, so warmly about how their arranged marriage, had just worked out very beautifully. And so it just reminded me of that. Obviously it doesn't always work that way and, shouldn't be imposed upon people, but it was just an interesting perspective.
And it's interesting about their children because we had faculty at Cal State at San Bernardino that Jill and I had over one time. I believe they were from India. They loved their arranged marriage and they loved each other, but their son that they wanted to arrange a marriage with did not want it.
Right.
So then you have the, yeah.
Well, I think, the thing about an arranged marriage is your expectations are different, right? When you get married to somebody out of, love,
Lust.
Or lust, you're expecting certain things to happen, and to last, that sort of initial thrill. And when you're marrying because it's arranged, what the terms are and kind of more what to expect, I think. Now, if you get some guy who ends up beating up his wife, that's another story.
But the parents know their kids, and they know their strengths and their weaknesses when they're arranging marriages.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, and I was just thinking the Orthodox still arrange marriages.
Yeah. That was what was brought out in this article is that, right. I guess they trusted or they knew that their parents knew them very well and would choose, appropriate partners for them. And again, this is just an example of an arranged marriage that did work out. And, obviously there was a lot of love there. Not always the case, but I think that was one of their points is that they knew their parents would choose well for them.
I have a coworker who's Indian and we were having a funny conversation about this. She's divorced and she says, I've always chosen badly. She says, I wish my parents would have arranged for me. She said, because I've never done a good job and they would have done a better job than I.
That's cute.
I think she's still hoping they'll get it for her for the next time around.
I know some Indian people that got arranged marriages and they actually do horoscopes. They go to a special person that does a horoscope as well, like a background check so they could, find the right people. Otherwise, if the horoscopes are wrong, they don't want them to get married.
And now
too, she said that certain signs she could never be married to a certain sign that's important. Yeah.
And I guess now in sort of a self-arrangement, I see, websites, sort of like, the 20 questions you should ask any potential partner. And in a sense, that's sort of what arranged marriages did, is they looked at certain factors. Again, I'm not saying I'm a proponent of arranged marriages, but this article just really stood out because it was a perspective that I hadn't, heard before. I wasn't familiar with. I always had such a negative view of arranged marriages, which certainly is often warranted, but this was another perspective and it was really interesting.
Well, maybe the matchmaker knew what she was doing. I mean, back to Fiddler, right? I mean, if you became that role in your society, it probably meant that you did it well, right? Because if you were making a lot of bad marriages, they probably would have found someone else to be the town manager. There would have been rebellion.
Right. Good point.
There probably are people who have a better sense of compatibilities that we don't.
Well, half the people get married for romantic reasons and it fails. You know,
Lots of pressures on relationships.
Yeah.
Oh, we've lost Rabbi.
Well, it's okay. We have a good topic to keep us going for a while.
Yeah. Romantic versus arranged marriages.
I love the story. Do you know in the movie when Harry?
I think most parents would like to arrange the marriages, but it doesn't work today. And then many times in the future, it doesn't work either. I mean, I have 3 children that were eventually divorced.
Yeah. Yeah, romantic.
I could have done a better job.
Doesn't always work, especially if you're really young when you get married. You're getting married out of passion, and that passion wanes after a while, and practicality takes over, and things go down the drain really fast sometimes.
And
Where is Rabbi? Where did Rabbi go?
I saw her looking at her phone, and I wonder if she got a message she had to respond to.
It's okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
But I think Jane made a really good point before about how, like the 21st century, we have this notion of romantic love, but I think most of history, most marriages were not, or at least, I mean, I think, wasn't it for a long time, even if you were in the lower classes, it was just a common law type of marriage anyway. You weren't even formally married anyway. So
poor people did not get married.
Right. It was that it was because there was an arrangement, there was a deal, right?
And what about today? Many people don't get married and live together for a long time.
Yeah.
I had a friend who swore he would never get married. He finally did. And a few years later, it busted up, and he just finally got his divorce official. And he said, "What was I thinking?" Oh, Rabbi says her computer blacked out.
Rabbi just said her computer
Oh,
blacked out.
Maybe
And
you're right.
it is-
Maybe it's not for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, we've had an interesting discussion, though.
Right. Jason, you were going to say something about when Harry met Sally.
Oh yeah, does anyone remember in that movie they have all these little interludes where they show a couple that's been together for a long time, and they have one that has I think it was an old Chinese couple talking about how their marriage was arranged, and it's just such an adorable story, and how, like, he says if he had not met her until the wedding day, but he snuck a look the night before, and he said, "I knew that if I didn't like the way she looked, I was going to run away to another village, but I was happy. I was happy with the way she looked, so I came." And then she says, "Yeah, we've been married 65 years."
Hi, sorry.
Hi.
I don't know what happened. There's something happened to my computer. It just went black.
Oh.
I'm very sorry, everybody. I don't know what happened. Technological failure. So next week will be Dr. Tamara Eskenazi, and then we meet in January. I have to change one of the dates because I have to be in DC with the students, confirmation students. So originally I was supposed to
December 18th. Weren't we supposed to meet?
Supposed to be the 10th, I believe. But
18th. So we're supposed to meet December 18th.
Anyway, in the last email, there was a notice about a change, but I will send out a new adult ed schedule for everybody, okay?